Hello and welcome to Take Me Home, the podcast offering a social democratic alternative for the politically homeless. I'm hilary.Salt.
And I'm Sebastian Moore.
And this is another news item week.
Yeah, we've done a lot recently, haven't we?
We have. Well, there's been a lot of news, to be fair.
Yeah.
And you want to talk about...
I'm going to talk about HS2.
Okay.
Because there was an update this week about it, and I think it gives us a chance to look back over everything that's happened with it in its 17-year history now.
We keep circling back to railways, don't we?
Yeah, quite right too. And you?
And I want to talk about the Tony Blair essay,
Yes.
5,000 word essay, and the kind of reaction to it.
Very good. And people might notice we've got a couple of new posters.
Yeah.
So this one's really cool. This is all the speed records that have been broken in Britain over the years. Airspeed record, water, land, railway. That one's particularly prominent, relevant today.
Yes.
With what we're talking about. And this, I absolutely love this. So this is the Northern Mother. And I'll try and show a better shot of it on the screen. A standard bearer for substance overgloss. So this is dedicated to Annie Jackson, born in Ardwick, Manchester, shortly after the First World War. Served with the armed forces during the Second World War. Married the boy next door. Had 5 kids, 2 of them stillborn. Widowed before she was 40. Brought up her children while working as a waitress in a factory. Final weekly pay packet, £32. Died of cancer, age 62. Heroine, lady, dancer, worker, fighter. Isn't that great?
Dancer. It's that north-south divide in our accents again, isn't it? Okay.
Should we get going?
Yeah, of course. Do you want to start off with HS2 then?
Yes. So the reason that HS2 has been in the news is that Heidi Alexander, the Transport Secretary, gave a ministerial statement last week to the House of Commons, in which she gave an update about the new timeline, budget, and what's going on with the project. Now, for anybody that doesn't know, HS2 stands for...
High Speed 2.
High Speed 2. What was HS1?
It was the thing that linked the cross-channel thing, isn't it?
London to the cross-channel tunnel. Yeah, exactly.
Right. And I think that came in under budget and on time.
Is that right? Very good. Oh, that's the postie. You hear that? So HS2 was first thought of in the Brown government, 2009.
Gosh.
But it was Cameron took it and ran with it, and mostly it was quite supported by both the Labour Party and the Conservatives during that time, but has since become a sort of, I was going to say a standard bearer for how the decline of Britain, I suppose. And it is pretty abysmal in some ways. So let me just give you a rundown of the initial idea, the project, and what it's looking like now. So the initial goal was for phase 1. So the idea of HS2 is that it starts in London and travels. Phase 1 would be they were going to build to Birmingham. And then phase 2A would be to Manchester, and 2B would be to Leeds.
Yep.
Now, this is high-speed rail, but the high-speed trains would then be able to travel on the normal tracks that we have north of Manchester and Leeds to go up to Scotland. So I think a lot of people think of it as it's just connecting these places. It's not. It's just that the centre of the country is where we have a lot of logjam.
Yeah.
Traffic jams with trains. It's weird to think about traffic jams with trains, isn't it? So that phase 1 was supposed to be ready, what year?
2026.
2026, yes, this year. It's not. Spoiler alert. The entire railway was around 330 miles, and it was supposed to cost about £45 billion. Phase 1 is now not going to be ready until late 2030s, perhaps 2039. They've cut phase 2A, phase 2B, to be or not to be. So it is now only going to be about 140 miles.
Okay.
And it's going to cost £102 billion.
Somebody was saying it cost more than Artemis, the Artemis mission
Artemis.
around the moon.
I don't know, actually. Is that true? Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me. Yeah.
So it's more expensive to get to Birmingham than to get to the moon.
This is, I mean, it's really difficult to overstate how expensive this is. I mean, it is absolutely extortionate when you compare it to previous rail projects and rail projects elsewhere. How many miles of track have been laid so far?
30.
0.
None.
Yeah, 0.
Gosh, right, okay. Where was I the other day? I was driving somewhere the other day and there were roadworks, and it said that the reason for the roadworks was because of the preparations for HS2. Well, it would have been going to Bearded Theory in Derby.
Oh, right, okay, yeah. What's interesting is that you do see, a couple of times recently I've noticed, literally yesterday I was in a meeting at church and they were talking about there's a patch of land which the church owns, and they said, well, originally they were going to have to lose a bit of the land because it's near Piccadilly Station.
Ah, yeah.
And for the new revamped Piccadilly Station that was part of the HS2 line. And then I was in a civic society meeting here in Withington, and they were talking about the Christie Hospital, which is the specialist cancer hospital in South Manchester. And there's a section of that where they were saying that it needs to be kept just in case HS2 does come to Manchester. So you do see the effects of it. So HS2, the idea then of, let's speak about the theory of it, because it's so easy for us to just throw the stats out there and say this is abysmal. But the idea of it was to take the crowded West Coast main line, which runs from London to Birmingham and then up past Manchester onto Scotland. That is incredibly crowded, particularly around a few choke points.
Yeah.
Now, this is where you have one track going in either direction, and you have on the track fast trains that are going from London Euston to Manchester Piccadilly, for example, or Birmingham or elsewhere. And you have commuter trains, slower stopping services, as well as freight trains.
Yeah.
Now, one might say, what does it look like when a track gets full? Do you literally have just trains lined up behind each other? Not quite, but it becomes incredibly complicated to navigate and to create a timetable that makes sure that these trains can pass each other. Now, there are a few sections of the track where there are 4 tracks, and trains can pass each other, but there are a couple of choke points. One of the choke points is between Birmingham and Manchester. So now that the line is not going to Manchester, it doesn't solve that problem. So we'll still need to solve that problem. That was the idea of it. Now, there was criticism early on because of the fact that countries with high-speed rail, places like France, Japan, their cities are much further apart from each other. So interestingly, the Japanese, I think it's called the Shinkansen high-speed train, and that received...
Sounds too much like Wincanton, that doesn't it? The haulage company.
I'm sure that's what it's called. But,
Okay.
that received quite a lot of criticism at the time in Japan, but it took a 4 or 5 hour car journey, and it can do it in 1.5 hours.
Okay.
Whereas something like London to Birmingham, it's not 4 or 5 hours in the car,
No.
and it's only knocking off 45 minutes off the train journey, something like that. So one of the myths about high-speed rail in the UK is that it is purely to make journeys faster. It's not, and that would have just been a benefit of it. Now, the problem is with something like Manchester now, it's going to make the journeys faster at all, really. The reason the HS2 team had to deal with the question of where do they go over hills? Do they go? Do they make tunnels? How are they going to buy land off people and businesses? And a few of the decisions early on have now caused the problems that we currently have, which was that they wanted to make it very environmentally friendly. A lot of the narrative driving HS2 was about reducing carbon emissions and about climate change, and they were quite proud of the fact that when it was running, it would run from day one as a carbon neutral transit system. Now, this means that
Is it diesel? Is it electric?
Electric, yeah, electrified lines. I presume it's electric. Yeah.
I just didn't know.
I'm no train expert. I'd love to be, but no, the whole of the West Coast Main Line is electrified.
That's true already.
The countries that have done this elsewhere, Spain, France, Spain has done a really amazingly cheap high-speed rail network. They have a couple of comparative advantages. One is that Spain, and if anyone knows Spain very well, there are just miles and miles of nothingness.
Emptiness.
It really is. Like, when my parents live in Spain, and just behind their house, they call it the Campo, right? Where it's not like anybody owns it. You just kind of wander over this barren landscape. So that's obviously helpful for if you're trying to do a high-speed rail network. Also, that there is a much more standardised approach to compulsory land purchases, whereas in the UK, and there are a couple of instances where we have tried to maintain a certain level of local control. So local councils have taken HS2 to court on several occasions, and there's so many of these costs, things like court fees and stuff that you wouldn't necessarily associate with an infrastructure project initially.
Yeah.
I'll give you a couple of examples. One is with Whittington Heath Golf Club. There was a £400,000 land purchase required, and HS2 ended up spending £7 million on new development for the golf club. And the owner of the golf club apparently was delighted about that. Not surprised. One of the other issues is that they have these cost plus contracts, which is that when they take on a firm, they will pay the firm a percentage of the total value of that contract. So the firm is incentivized for there to be for the costs to overrun, because they end up getting paid more money at the end of the day. I think when you compare it to like the Moonshot project, for example, in the 60s, I believe there were caps on the amount that private businesses could make from their contracts.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, there's two ways generally people approach a negotiation. One is trying to make it fixed fee, so all the risk is on the contractor, and the other, from the contractor side, is trying to make it cost plus, so all the risk is on the side of the person buying the service. And obviously, there's always tensions between those two.
Mm-hmm. Where are we? So
Whittington Golf Club,
Whittington
we've done.
Golf Club, yeah. And there are loads of examples of this. Of course, everybody points to the bat tunnel, where in order to protect a certain species of bat, they designed this quite audacious tunnel. But I think what I want to do with this segment, and the reason I'm bringing it up today, is I hope that you and I, this is kind of what we try to do with this podcast, which is to, rather than just a polemic about HS2 bad because of this, is to say, why is that the case? How did we get here in the first place? Why are we incapable of building in this country of big infrastructure projects? And I think, as any keen listeners to the podcast might already guess, we often, and I would say, it comes down to a political solution. And a lot of people, a lot of the media and politicians want to put blame on the certain lobby or something. But at the end of the day, it has to be about the vision of the politicians that are taking it to the people and saying, this is what we want to do. And that's where you'll get the breakthrough. I mean, why is it so expensive compared to how it was in the past? I mean, we are in Manchester, the first passenger railway station anywhere in the world was here in Manchester. Liverpool Street Station.
Yep.
Built, and that line was built in, it was opened in 1830. It was proposed, I think, around the mid-1820s. Took 5 years to build. It cost £1.2 million, which I think in today's money is about £1 billion.
I was going to say that
Right.
that would be a lot of money.
Yeah, a
in
lot of
today's
money.
terms. Yeah.
And it's 35 miles long.
Okay.
So a lot of money for a short track, but it's still, I mean, it's tiny amount of money compared to what we're spending on HS2. I mean, what's interesting is that if you work out the cost per mile and check for inflation, it seems to be about the same amount of money that Spain is spending on railways and France is spending on railways. 30, 40 million pounds a mile.
It was this one that was built in the 1800s.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, okay.
Whereas HS2,
yeah.
I mean, it's going to be 102 billion for 140 miles. So we're not too far off £1 billion for a mile, which is staggering, absolutely staggering. And whilst people might look back at the 1830 project and say, there were far fewer barriers then than we have now, there were also increased barriers, like the fact that this is the first time they've been doing it.
Yeah, technical challenges, yeah.
Massive technical challenges, in which we have all of the know-how and a lot of the technology now to be able to combat these things. So whilst they're not perfect comparisons, it does seem like when Britain was at its zenith and able to do these amazing things, it was spending far, far less money than it is today.
And I guess one of the reasons for that is that we've talked before, haven't we, about what we need is a competent state. And we don't seem to be able to produce one of those. It does feel that part of what's lacking is kind of any political mandate for a government to do stuff, which then means that because it has no mandate, it's really easy for sectional interest to challenge it. And you have all those things like judicial review. You were saying people challenging decisions, and that's the thing that kind of really racks up costs.
Yeah, I mean, £3.9 billion was spent on buying up land and property, which is a massive overshot the estimates as well. So, yeah, at all aspects, when you think about planning, you think about court fees, you think about land and property. Or every stage, the costs have been far greater than you might have thought. Where does the root of the problem lie? Well, Labour and the Conservatives both had this in their manifestos. So if you look at from a political angle and you say, well, where is the democratic consent? People would say, look back to a manifesto. But it shows the difficulty of that, because if we have a two-party system, which we had for a very long time, perhaps until just very recently, and you've got two parties and both of them have it in their manifesto, and you're voting for one party because of a certain reason that's nothing to do with HS2, then you can easily claim that, well, this had massive public support. The fact that at the 2017 general election, 80-something% of people, was it 80% voted for the Conservatives or Labour or something like that? It was the highest in a long time. And both parties supported it at the time. Whereas the opinion polling on HS2 is much lower. And those who strongly support it, very, very low. So there is an issue with that. Now, I think, because we're about solutions, I've got 3 ideas of why.
Hit me.
And if people would say, are you pro or against HS2? And if someone puts a gun to my head, I'll say massively pro.
Would you?
Yes. Because I like being contrarian.
Okay.
Because if it's a question, I mean, it's all gone wrong. It's been an absolute disaster. And it's a chance for us as a country to say, I mean, I think this is such a scandal. And as with a lot of the other scandals, it becomes apparent slowly.
Yes.
And slowly over the years, and you think, actually, what on earth's gone on here?
We'll spend another £10 billion investigating what went wrong.
Exactly right. So it's been absolutely abysmal. However, the moment we stop trying to do things like HS2 is the moment we just die as a country, and I'm much more worried about that. How can we solve these long term? One, integration. So this idea, I think, filters down into so many different areas of society. It's usually used when we're talking about immigration. HS2, the decision was to go underground for large parts of the journey. So I think the travel time from London to Birmingham was about 45 minutes, only 10 minutes of which would have been above ground.
Okay.
So they're massive tunnelling projects.
Yeah.
Tunnelling costs about 10 times that of normal track.
Okay.
Cuttings, which a lot of this is cuttings, 5 times.
Okay.
And if I think about train travel, of which I'm a massive proponent, one of the best things about train travel is looking out the window.
It is.
I love travelling along the West Coast Main Line down to London.
Yeah.
And I think of parts of the country that I don't stand out in my head as being the things you talk about to foreigners and say, oh, this is the best part of England. And yet so much of that of the middle of the country is just gorgeous countryside. So I would be much more brazen about, no, we're going to put it overland and we're going to integrate it into the landscape. So things like viewing platforms.
Okay.
You know?
Yeah. Okay.
Why not? Show your kids HS2's, just down here. Let's have a look at a train coming past.
Okay.
Why not? And see a train travelling at 225 miles an hour.
Okay.
Another element to Heidi Alexander's ministerial statement was that the top speeds are going to be decreased from 225 miles an hour to 199 miles an hour. It's just that thing we just can't do it anymore, can we? Another thing is vision. So a lot, and this ties into the third. These two are kind of mixed, which is democratic consent.
Yes.
So HS2 is one of those things that I barely heard of in its early stages. And we've got this the wrong way round. So much of the public dialogue about this is later on in projects that have gone wrong. It should have been right at the start. It should have, we should have welcomed the public's participation on what, they wanted to see with it.
Yeah.
And to have all of these conversations out before we even get to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
This links to vision because vision is so important. When you say to somebody, are you for or against HS2? And this is the where the media landscape has got to as well. I remember this with when Sunak cut the Manchester leg. It was, and you might see when you go into a general election, it shows the parties where they differ on certain things. And one might be pro HS2, one might be against. But the one that's pro might be generally against big infrastructure projects, but they think, oh, we've already spent a lot of money. 40 billion has already gone into HS2.
Somebody was saying on the radio that it would cost us as much to stop doing it now as to finish it.
Yeah, so it would cost us a lot of money to stop. I don't think it would cost us as much as... We've spent about 40 billion. I don't think it's going to cost us 60 billion to stop. That would be crazy.
Okay.
But the cost benefit now becomes... You've got to weigh up the fact that we're only going to spend a 60 billion more.
Yeah.
How much benefit is there? The vision for this, I just think, was so limited. I mean, as much as there was a vision, it was connect London to the north so that the north can access all the benefits of London.
Yeah.
It's such SW1 thinking.
It is.
What are we trying to do with a big project like this? Are people aware of the fact that the West Coast Main Line is pretty much full? Are people aware of the fact that the price you're paying on tickets goes up because of the demand, right? So they raise the ticket prices so that there's not so much demand on that line, and it costs us a fortune to travel down south. These sorts of questions have to be part of that bigger vision of what do we want to see, and I would think a Britain that hopefully we're trying to advocate for and help build is one where you achieve amazing ambitions, like connecting all different parts of the country by rail. I want to show you a railway map of the country.
Okay.
I saw this week and I sort of half knew what to expect, but it really shocked me. And I'll put it up so that people can see it. I'll show you on my computer. So this was 196 years of passenger rail in Great Britain.
Okay.
And you'll see the stations sort of popping up in the 1800s and how we had the densest railway network anywhere in the world. And then around the 1950s, 60s, you'll remember we've talked about beaching cuts.
We did, yeah.
On the podcast before.
Gosh, they just disappear.
It just absolutely disappears. And I knew that would happen to a degree. I didn't know quite how much that would, how stark that would look on the map. All of the beaching cuts, I've become radicalised on this since we did that last podcast, where I just think, actually, no, it's a massive mistake. And so much of the country would benefit now from particularly light rail, so rail going from village to village, and small stopping services which connect all these parts of the country. I think that has to be part of the vision. I want to read you a quote from Paul Theroux, which I love.
Okay.
Paul Theroux is Louis Theroux's dad, and he wrote a book. He's a travel writer.
Yeah.
And he wrote a book called The Great Railway Bazaar, which I thoroughly recommend, and I'll put a link to it in the description. He said, in that book, he said, anything is possible on a train. A great meal, a binge, a visit from card players, an intrigue, a good night's sleep, and strangers' monologues framed like Russian short stories, which I just absolutely love. And if anyone's had the chance to do long distance railway travel, I think they'll know what I mean, which is it completely changed my outlook on traveling. And he says this in the book, and it resonates so much with me, where you get on the train. At one point he says, I found out it was only 12 hours to Lahore, and I was very upset because I wanted it to be longer.
Okay.
And I've done 18-hour, 20-hour train journeys, and the longer it is, the more enjoyable it becomes. So I think any vision for rail travel in the UK, firstly, it has to be all-encompassing. So it can't be just about one high-speed line from London to Birmingham. It has to be, how does that map onto things like Northern Powerhouse Rail, which we've talked about before? How does it map onto smaller train services between villages and towns? And sleeper trains.
Yes.
I want sleeper trains.
Yeah.
Right? I want...
Are we big enough, though, as a country for sleeper trains?
Yeah,
I know you
absolutely.
go from London to Scotland, but...
And what's the other sleeper train that we have?
I don't know.
London to Penzance.
Is it?
Yeah. So somewhere in the south to somewhere in the southwest.
How long does that take?
It's 7.5 hours.
Is it?
Yeah.
Blimey. Okay.
If we're big enough to have a sleeper train from London to Penzance, we're absolutely big enough to have one from Birmingham to Inverness.
Yes.
Right? I want children that are growing up in Birmingham to be able to see what it's like in the Highlands of Scotland.
Yeah.
Why isn't that a great goal for us as a country? To connect all these different parts of our amazing country. It's only from travelling that I've come back to the UK and realised quite how magnificent it is.
Yeah.
I've learnt of something this week, motor rail. You might know of this, but
I'm not sure I do.
It stopped before I was born in 1995, but it ran for about 40 years, where you could take your car onto the train.
Gosh, no.
You've never seen this?
No.
I'll have to show you a photo.
So this is, you can take your car on the cross-channel ferry, can't you? On the cross-channel train. What do you call it? Eurotunnel.
So motor rail, literally you'd have cars all lined up on the trains.
So that does look like a ferry, doesn't it? Like when you drive onto a ferry.
Yeah.
It's like that, driving onto a train.
And perhaps it's too nostalgic to bring something like that back. And one of the arguments of why it died out was that cars became more reliable, so you could drive long distances across the country. And you didn't... This was partly to get people to seaside towns, and then they could have their cars to travel around.
Yeah.
But it's just another example of something that we did that I didn't know about. I thought that was really cool. So
it's news to me as well. It's new. Every day's a school day. It feels like there should be a carriage on there for electric bikes as well, so you can take electric bikes on the train as well.
And bicycles. Absolutely.
And ordinary bicycles,
So I used to do this when I was a child, like 16, 17. I would cycle a lot with a friend, and sometimes we'd take our bikes on the train so that we could explore further areas away. Now I'm so put off by it, and it feels very adversarial. You have to book it in advance, and sometimes they don't allow you on, and so I just don't do it at all.
Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely, a cabin where you can just pop your bike on.
Yeah.
And the possibilities with trains are so much greater than you might think if you only ever do the the Avanti West Coast from London to Manchester, or, you know, the different carriages you can have, restaurant cars, and I've had some amazing experiences, you know, in Kazakhstan on a restaurant car.
Yeah,
like it's incredible, and train travel is so it's amazing compared to something like road travel, because you can just, if you've not got enough space, you can just add another carriage on, just pop another one on. And you'll see that with freight trains that you know, potentially a mile long. So trains, I love trains.
Yes, okay. I think people might have got the idea of that by now. Yeah, well done. Good. So it feels hard to segue from that into Tony Blair, but I think there are some overlaps.
Trains are great. Tony Blair's not great. Is that a segue?
Yeah, I'm not sure there's a career for you in marketing, really. But I wanted to talk about this essay that Tony Blair has written. It's on his Tony Blair Institute for Global Change website. It's quite long. Andy Burnham says he's read it 3 times because, you know, you should give it appropriate attention. I can't say I've read it 3 times. I've dipped into it a few times, read it once. And I just wanted to bring some of the points from it to the podcast. I have got some quotes that I wanted to read out from it. So I wanted to talk about the essay itself and then a bit about the reaction to it. And perhaps finish off with my reactions to it, if that's okay. So the kind of background to this, the context to this, is that Tony Blair is kind of intervening in the whole crisis, can you call it, in the Labour Party? So
the perma-crisis.
The perma-crisis, yeah. But at the moment, the way that that's playing out is in terms of this. I guess it's not really a leadership contest as yet, is it? In that they're kind of pausing everything while they see if Andy Burnham can be elected, so that they can then have a leadership contest that includes him, which it all seems very self-indulgent to me. But anyway, that's the context to Tony Blair intervening. And he's intervening in a very critical way, critical of the Labour Party and of the way that they're not just running the country, but approaching this whole internal Labour Party stuff that's going on. So, first quote I wanted to pull out, he says, governments which succeed don't start with a personality contest or a political question, as in, how do we save the country from reform? They start with an idea, a project, a governing purpose, an analysis of what's wrong, and a plan to put it right. The challenge of democracy is not transparency, honesty, or conspiracy theories about the hidden power of elites. It is efficacy. It is the ability to get big things done. Now, I mean, that kind of sounds in some ways okay, doesn't it? You know, if you want to get HS2 done, then you need a government that can get big things done. But I do think that quote just has a bit of a feel of Mussolini got the trains running on time about it, that actually it doesn't matter what you just do what you have to do to get things done. And in particular, the idea that he says the challenge of democracy is not transparency or honesty. And that kind of feels to me rather taking the public for granted. You know, surely part of democracy should be about being transparent and honest with the electorate. And if you're saying, no, it doesn't matter how many lies you tell, as long as you get things done, that feels to me rather, you know, that isn't what democracy is about. That's just you know, you thinking that what you think is right and you're going to impose it on everybody, and whatever it takes to do that, that's what we'll do. So I didn't like that. That was one of his opening gambits. So, and the next thing that he talks about, which is one of the things that's been picked up on in the press quite a bit, is this word ballast. Do you know what ballast is?
Like a support beam?
Isn't it when you put weight in the bottom of a boat so it doesn't tip over?
Yeah. Okay, yeah.
So he quotes John Adams.
The president?
Yeah, second president of the US, who said, "Ballast is what I want. I totter with every breeze." And his argument, Tony Blair's argument, is that that's the problem with this government. It doesn't have ballast.
You could say what we need is strong and stable.
Strong and stable, yes, indeed. I remember that from somebody else, yes. And I think on one level that's right, but I would imagine that my view would be that what a government gets ballast from is from having an ideology, a belief system, a mandate. And it needs to get that from the public. But again, Tony Blair doesn't ever seem to, in any of this, talk about the public at all. The public never seem to come into his thinking at all. It's all very kind of managerial. So I think he imagines that ballast comes from things like an evidence base, those kind of things where, it's very technocratic and it's very expert-led. So it kind of tries to take things out of the realm of politics and into the realm of experts and managerialism. And I think that's what he imagines is where the ballast comes from. So then the bit that I think has received perhaps the most attention is this idea of the radical centre. And I know, in some of the WhatsApp groups we've been in, there's a bit of a discussion about, is he right to say what's lacking is a radical centre? And are we it, almost? But I don't think that is right. So let me just tell you what he says about the radical centre. So he says, the centre, properly defined, and I should say as an aside, a lot of this is very pompous. It's kind of, I was in government for 13 years and I was re-elected 3 times and I've worked with the Trump administration. I have experience of this. And it's all very, self-indulgent on Tony Blair's part, I think. But anyway, sorry, I've gone off tangent there. The centre, properly defined, is where you put policy first and politics last. So you begin with a question, what is the right answer? And only once you have that do you engage in the political task of persuading people of it. So...
Is that his description of the centre?
That's, the centre properly defined. That's what centre is, properly defined. Now, I should say, when he says, well, you put policy first and politics last, it's clear from what he goes on to say that by politics there, he means internal party politics. He doesn't mean...
And like big P politics.
Big P, yeah.
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 Like manoeuvring and yeah.
Exactly. Because he says later, both main parties have gone off the rails. There we go, another segue.
That's the link.
By putting internal politics first and good policy second, such as Labour moving to the left after 2007, culminating in the absurdity of the Corbyn leadership and the Tories with Brexit. So politics, he means internal party politics. So what he's saying here is that policy comes first, and I think that's bit's right. Policy should come first. But that policy should be a policy that's been crafted and worked on by an engagement and a debate with the public. And again, the public is nowhere to be seen in any of this. So all of this is very much top down. What is the right answer? It's what Tony Blair thinks the right answer is. It's that. We've said before, haven't we, that we really think that this idea of the national interest being what should motivate things is right. But so many people use those words, the national interest, to mean it's what I think the national interest is. And I think Tony Blair is doing the same thing. He's saying, what is the right answer? It's what I think is the right answer. And I will, make that the starting point. Whereas the starting point should be engagement with the public, and it should be, I'm not saying you should be driven by a focus group, but, we all need, in a democracy, we all need to be involved in a debate about what's right for the country. And that doesn't appear in this anywhere. The people never appear.
The people never appear.
Just to kind of hammer that home a little bit, and this is the bit that I found the most astounding, really, most astonishing bit in it. So he talks about the Labour Party manifesto going into the 2024 general election. And he says, due to the way the manifesto was drafted, the government took with it into power commitments, which meant there was a gap between the government rhetoric around growth and the impact of these commitments on what the business community needed to restore the so-called animal spirits and get the private sector moving. Those commitments were the new workers' rights laws, the net zero acceleration, the phasing out of British oil and gas, the uplift in the minimum wage beyond inflation, and the non-dom changes. Now, he says, the Prime Minister and the Chancellor should have said right at the outset, after being elected, these are commitments which economic circumstances have rendered unwise to proceed with. And they should have dropped the commitments. Dropping those commitments would have been painful but bearable, because government would have started with real goodwill from business. Now, is it me? I mean, is that not just astounding that he thinks, oh, yeah, you should have gone into an election with all these commitments. Yeah. The minute you got elected, you should have dropped them, and that would have resulted in goodwill.
From business.
From business?
It's incredible. Yeah.
I mean, that to me is just shows such arrogance and contempt for the electorate that it just drips with, this kind of condescension and ill will towards ordinary people. Yeah. So that's I think probably the worst bit. So to go back to the centre again, the centre, he says, this bit I quite like. The centre should never be the place of managing the status quo. And I don't know if I sent you some things that I'd been working on yesterday, didn't I? Some kind of writing. And one thing, I wrote that before I read this. One of the things I thought was quite interesting is that a lot of the language I'd used in that, if you'd done a word map of what I'd written and this, there'd be loads of overlap. But drawing absolutely the diagonally opposing conclusions. Because I do think that one of the real problems at the moment is that everybody is talking about, realistically, how do we better manage the status quo? They're not talking about the kind of fundamental change that I think everybody wants. I think there's absolute evidence that ordinary people want fundamental change in society, whereas everybody's talking about, how do we better manage this or that? I mean, even Farage, I think, is talking about how to be a better Tory party.
Yeah, 100%. And in this conversation around what are the new dividing lines, and something I said at the Battle of Ideas North was that I thought it might be, the new dividing lines might be those that want change and those that don't. And those that don't are the liberals, because we've been in a liberal world for the last 40 years. And that's why we might discuss post-liberal, right? We might label ourselves as that. And I think in some ways you have elements of that on, the so-called left.
Yeah.
Parts of the Green Party and people that are in favour of the Green Party. You have parts of that with us and the SDP. You have parts of that in something like Restore Britain, where people are saying, no, the liberal order, actually now we need to move past that and we need to move into a new form of politics. Yeah. And so many constantly show that they're actually committed to maintaining the status quo. Yeah,
they're just stuck in this, I guess you might call it the kind of post-war stasis, or certainly the
post-Thatcher stasis. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So let me going back to Tony Blair. The centre should never be the place of managing the status quo, or of splitting the difference between left and right, or of just being moderate. And I actually think if we're talking about centre politics, I think actually that is right. But remember, he's not talking about that. By the centre, he's talking about the kind of managerial centre that, makes things happen. So he says, rather, as I said earlier, the centre is the place where policy comes first and politics second. You work out the correct analysis. you being him, I think, you being the elite. You work out the correct analysis and then the correct answer, and you shape your political strategy around it. Where, therefore, the correct answer requires radical change, the centre should be the radical change maker. Now, that again sounds quite, when you first read it, yeah, that sounds quite good. But when he's talking about the radical centre here, it is that managerial centre. And when he comes to his conclusions at the end, they're all very, they're not different to what anybody else is saying, really. And in fact, a lot of the things that he's saying are problematic, and perhaps this segues into the reaction to it, are things where it was the changes that Tony Blair made and Gordon Brown made in their regime that make things really difficult to do. So some of the things we've talked about already, like legal challenges to government getting things done, the ECHR. So one of the things, for example, he says you should do whatever it takes to stop the boats, stop immigration, illegal immigration. And, I think anybody would say, well, one of the problems with doing that is the possibility of challenging under the ECHR, under the refugee conventions. Did say in one of the analyses I read of his document that actually David Blunkett and Jack Straw had both argued against being part of the refugee conventions, which I didn't realise that part of Labour had thought of those things at one point. Not a point. Things to do is to look that up, really. But a lot of the things that certainly that Blair government, that Blair regime introduced are the things that make the things he's now saying we have to do very difficult to do. And that is part of the right-wing reaction. It shouldn't be right-wing, but, the kind of Tory and established party reactions. But, it's all your fault. Tony Blair is kind of what they're saying. You made all this happen. And to some extent that's true. But I still think that what they're missing is exactly the same as what he's missing is, where's the public in all this?
Yeah.
Where is the ability for ordinary people to influence that agenda? Because they still seem to be stuck in their smoke-free room, it would be these days, rather than smoke-filled room. They're deciding everything about what needs to happen that has an impact on everybody's lives, and we're kind of excluded from all that. And that feels to me the real problem. So perhaps picking up on part of that, can we talk about Andy Burnham?
Yeah, sure.
So, the interesting thing about this is that it's set against the background of the Makerfield by-election.
Yeah.
This area in Wigan that Andy Burnham is contesting to try to get into Parliament so he can be part of this leadership election. And so he has reacted to this intervention. And one of the things he says, which I think is right, is it's great that we're having this debate as part of a by-election discussion. Quite right, because, that is one way in which you perhaps at least involve part of the public in this discussion. So what he says is what this essay from Tony Blair misses, and I said he's read it 3 times, he says, is the fact that living standards have flatlined. He says since 2008, I think actually you could take it back beyond there, realistically. And he says that nothing that Tony Blair is saying in all this really tackles that. The thing that they agree on, and I think we would agree as well, is that what we really need is economic growth. And part of Blair's analysis is that needs deregulation, more deregulation. So, in the same way that he was criticising those manifesto commitments that were enacted that are anti-business, Blair is saying to really generate growth, we need to be more pro-business. So we need to get rid of lots of regulation, planning restrictions, all that kind of stuff. Burnham, on the other hand, says, actually, what we need is more government. We need a more interventionist government to power growth. So there's lots of these new terminologies around Andy Burnham, aren't there? So people talk about Manchesterism. I think he prefers the term good growth. So he always uses the example, doesn't he, of the Manchester buses. So Manchester buses are now all under local authority control. They're not owned by local authority, just to be clear. They are run by the private sector.
Model,
yeah, that's right. But, local government controls things like fare levels and timetabling and who can go where. So he uses that as an example where actually really road level local government intervention has driven good change. And there's something to that.
For sure, yeah.
We would agree that there's lots of areas where the market doesn't work well and we need a better state, a more competent state to intervene and to drive things like infrastructure, renewal, things like cheap energy is one of the ones that we've talked about quite a lot.
Which Tony Blair mentions, doesn't he, in his essay?
He does.
And I didn't read the essay, but I saw a couple of interviews where he mentions it and says
that
he's sort of saying long-term net zero fine, but this current net zero policy is wrong.
Yes.
And he's right about that. And he mentions a couple of things that we've been saying for a long time about the fact that it's all well and good reducing your carbon emissions, but if you're just offshoring those carbon emissions...
Correct.
If you're going to be using, and he makes this argument that even the most conservative estimates say we'll need at least 15% of our energy to come from fossil fuels in 10, 20 years' time, whatever it is. He said if you're going to be using 15% of those as fossil fuels, then you might as well make them your own fossil fuels.
Correct.
And that's when we talk about the political and finding areas of agreement and arguing things, that's somewhere where you should be able to get environmentalists to agree with people that don't think climate change is a real problem, right? That should be an area of agreement, but with an unhealthy political environment, it's very difficult.
That's right. Yeah.
Sorry, but
that
was a segue.
Yeah. So yes, you're right. So I think we would say that there are some things that Blair is saying that we agree with, but kind of go back to what Andy Burnham's reaction was. He's arguing that we need more state, better state, more regulation, and that Tony Blair's analysis that we need less of all that is actually wrong. Now, I think at one level I agree with that, and I think if you think about the buses, things like that, that's, I don't think that's like rocket science to say that that's right. But I do think there are much wider areas where I would argue that over-regulation is problematic. And I think in many areas we have this idea that, that's been deregulated. And it's not been deregulated. Regulation is just done differently. So there's lots of areas, for example, where the Bank of England is the regulator. The Bank of England at arm's length from government. So therefore that's not regulated by government. Yeah, but it's still regulated. And when somebody's regulating something and they don't have a political mandate, I think their kind of go-to place is to over-regulate and to be very risk-averse. Mm-hmm. And so that's actually, in many ways, even more problematic than direct government regulation.
And which makes perfect sense, because if you are in that position, you're going to be incentivised to over-regulate, because there's not going to be a massive amount of pushback. Yeah. But if you were to under-regulate and something goes wrong, there will be. Exactly
that, yeah. So, I mean, I think there's been a lot of discussion and more heat than light, you might say, generated from this intervention by Tony Blair. The thing I would just always bring it back to is that everybody who's commenting on it, even Burnham, is not really talking about how do we as a nation decide what we want. And I think wherever debates are taking place, there is more and more, I think, a tendency to cut down the ability to which the public can contribute to those debates. So I think we talked during the local government elections about quite often now when a local government consults on something, it's an online consultation. And they might do quite a lot of comms to say, let's get that consultation out, let's get as many responses to it as we can. But that's not really a way in which the public can properly engage, I don't think, because the questions are often, I think, put together with the finger on the scale. You know, they kind of know what answers they want, and so that they kind of drive you to giving those answers. There's so many consultations I've opened, and I kind of got to question 3, and I've got to the stage where I'm thinking, well, nothing I say in response to question 3 will give an answer that demonstrates what my feelings are. You know, so it's really problematic. So those kind of consultations run by local government, I think, are more and more tick box and actually very much separated from ordinary residents. I think within political parties, it's the same. So, I mean, you won't remember this, but the Labour Party conference used to be a massively contentious get together where there were massive arguments. I mean, when they got rid of Clause 4, Clause 4 is the thing that argued for state ownership of assets, nationalisation in effect. There were it was covered on the television, they were covered in the papers, all different people came with their thoughts and they all had a massive row about it in public. Yeah. And they got to a solution which not everybody agreed with, but became party policy, and the party cohered around that. And I think, you know, if you look at the Labour Party conference today, it's very stage managed. It's the same with the TUC conference. All those debates seem to be, the idea is to have them in a closed room beforehand, and then what you present is a united front. And I think that's a real problem for political parties, because I think political parties need to be hotbeds of political debate and discussion and disagreement. And it's only by having all those arguments that you can come to a better answer. You know, if you start off with this is the right answer, as Tony Blair seems to think, this is the correct answer, and then we'll engage politically, that's got to be a worse answer, because you've not heard from everybody who has a real stake and a real interest and a real understanding often and experience in that field. And so I think all political parties actually need to be a lot more democratic, a lot more involving of, you know, different views from within their membership. So we talked about councils, talked about political parties, and, you know, I think if you look at any kind of area where there's an attempt from government to find out what people think, it's very much choreographed and controlled, and there's always whenever there's because things spark off online, don't they? And you have a big furious row going on online, and people say, "Oh, it's so polarised." And actually, I think when we talked to Tom Slater on the podcast, he said politics needs to be polarised, and you know the kind of the other end of the spectrum is where people say you can't have any debate about this because here's the evidence, and you know that's the answer. So there's no point having a debate about it. And it's when you do those kind of things that I think you get real frustration and anger from people. And I think we've got to have a way that people can really be involved in those debates across society.
Okay, wow. I got loads of thoughts.
Okay, I'll shut up for a moment.
So on, I'll try and go backwards. I might miss bits, but on the point about the Labour conference and that being a hotbed of political disagreement. I think the reason we are where we are in terms of how the parties operate is because of the incentives of what do these people that are involved want to get out of what they're doing. Essentially, how do they envisage winning? And back in the day, and I think this is true, different, it's cyclical, but back in the day, if you think about someone like Tony Benn, like his idea of winning would be to impart his vision for the country onto the country, right? And to win the argument, to say, I want to do this. Are people with me? Nowadays, there's a lot of people theorize about it's the the end of history. There is an alternative, Thatcher and all of that. But nowadays, people consider winning is really to get to number 10.
Yeah.
Maybe do a year or two, go into a fancy private sector job afterwards. Like the people that are involved in politics now, do we think that any of them really care about their vision for the country? I don't feel it, honestly. You okay?
I want to sneeze, but it won't come.
Okay. I thought you were shocked at what I was saying. I think that's why we get to this stage where people feel the need within parties to put forward a unified approach, a united front, so that they can win and beat the opposition. And then there's all this internal wrangling that's done in secret to try and jostle for position to get to the higher echelons of the party. I mean, there's certain things like, cabinet meetings, for example, in the past would be really long affairs where everybody would get their points out, whereas they became, and I think this is under Thatcher, wasn't it? They became much reduced. I'm not sure if that's right, if it was under Thatcher, but certainly Tony Blair's cabinet meetings would be short affairs. But more importantly, I want to talk about one aspect of what you were saying, because I think you give too much credit to Blair and to Burnham, and I think you're taking it at face value. It doesn't really matter, like what Blair says. It doesn't, right? And it's weird to think, because he was a prime minister for 13 years. And with Tony Blair, we've been discussing this a little bit in the SDP in the Northwest about, should we take what he says? Should we really pay attention to what he says? In some ways, yes, right? Tony Blair was an incredibly talented politician and a bad prime minister. I think that is in some ways, I mean, it's arguable, obviously, but I think that's pretty obvious in terms of the legacy he left. But it's silly to also just completely write him off as, he doesn't know anything, because he really is like as effective an operator as we've ever had in this country. And just if anybody disagrees, just go and watch a PMQs from that period. He was far head and shoulders above someone like Keir Starmer. The reason I say I think you give him too much credit is because we are still under this illusion that the centre is in the middle of politics. And it's not. Centrism is crazy. Centrism is so extreme. Centrism is what ends up with us as a country incentivising migrants to risk their lives in crossing the channel, and then justifies that because it says, "Oh, we can't do anything about it. We've signed up to this convention, or we're in this." Centrism is the where we end up with police officers not arresting people if they've stolen less than £200 worth of goods. Right? Centrism is crazy. I would say that we in the SDP, we are the new moderates. Right? We are moderate because the moderate acceptable level of illegal immigration is 0. Right? If anybody would like to argue and say, actually, it's 5 or 10 people should, try and cross the channel a year, then they can do. But I would argue that the moderate and most of the public is there and saying, of course it should be 0. That's what we should aim for. The same with crime and law and order. We want to have a strong state that can do these things. We need to escape the trap that is set for us by Blair and Burnham and people of lining ourselves up ideologically somewhere on that spectrum, because the spectrum is not, Ed Davey is not moderate. Ed Davey's crazy, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure he's a lovely man. I'm not, attacking him personally. Also with Burnham, I I would be very confident in saying that when Burnham has read the essay and heard the speeches, his team is saying, right, we have to find a way to oppose this because it's politically, it's political suicide to just say, oh, Tony Blair's right, because the public are so against that, what Tony Blair represents, of that old politics that the public are rebelling against. You think of Brexit and the rise of reform. So Burnham is being tactical in making sure he finds something to disagree with. And Burnham came out quite quickly, and the BBC headline was, Tony Blair doesn't mention inequality once. Because he's found something that speaks to people. We think of Greens, and Zach Polanski's doing really well talking about problems with inequality. And he's found something that he can use as a wedge to separate him and Blair. Streeting then came out the same day with something similar, and the BBC had to say Burnham and Streeting disagree, because Streeting doesn't want to be put in the same bracket as Blair, even though he is pretty much a Blairite. Interestingly, even Starmer said Tony Blair's wrong.
Yeah.
They're all trying to distance themselves from him. So Tony Blair can come out and say something that is pretty sensible, something about net zero and how we need to get, change direction on that. I think you and I would agree with that. A lot of other people would agree with that. It's quite sensible. But somehow people don't like it because of what he represents. And what people say, what politicians say, is more than just the words they use. We mentioned strong and stable from Theresa May.
Yeah.
People didn't hate strong and stable because they disagreed with the notion that we should be a strong and stable country. They disagreed with it because it was rubbish. And they knew it was rubbish. They knew that it was just words. It was just a slogan. It was empty. And so we have to get back to a point in our politics where we say what we mean and people actually know we mean that. And that's the challenge. That's the challenge for us as a party in the SDP. It's the challenge for what Burnham's trying to do in Makerfield. That's what people should be judging politicians on. Like, do they actually mean what they say? And to peel under the, to scratch the surface a little bit and see whether it actually adds up.
Thing is, I've spent 4 hours looking at what Tony Blair said, and now you say it doesn't matter.
I don't mean it literally. It doesn't matter. Like, it's worthwhile.
Yeah.
And I think, use a historical lens. It's the equivalent of, like, when did Tony Blair leave office? 2007. Halfway through 2007. So did I say he was Prime Minister for 13 years? It was 10 years, to correct the record. 10 years.
It was 13 years Labour government, wasn't it?
13 years as Labour leader.
Right, okay.
Because he became leader in 94 when John Smith died.
Okay.
But it's the equivalent. We are 19 years on from Blair.
Yeah.
It's crazy to think about. It's the equivalent of let's say Ted Heath talking about Neville Chamberlain.
Yeah.
It's sort of weird. It's like, but you're in a new era and you're talking about the previous era.
Yeah.
But it's also relevant in the sense that he is a former Prime Minister, and I am somewhat a traditionalist in that we should hold these people in high regard, and that's hard to do when it includes people like Liz Truss, but fair enough. Yeah. And say, well, he's saying something, it might be worth listening to. So I don't disagree with you spending time looking through it. Reading it 3 times is over the top.
Because it's really long.
Do you think that's true? Andy Burnham didn't read it 3 times.
That's what he says he did.
Can you imagine it's the sort of thing, when someone says, oh, I've seen that film like 10 times. I think, have you actually though?
Yeah.
Because when you watch a film 10 times, it becomes silly. Reading that 3 times, I think on the 3rd time you'd think, I've got better things to do with my time.
Yes, possibly. Yeah. I don't think we want to suggest Andy Burnham's not being honest with the electorate, though, do we?
No, Mr. Burnham, he's straight up. And I'm going to hate myself for saying this because it will be another thing I have to remember to add in the show notes, but I will add a link to, I don't know how to say his name, Joshi Herman's article on Burnham that he released last week. I think it was titled, Stop Looking for Burnhamism. I've been looking for years and never found it.
Yes,
and it's a brilliant article because unlike so much of the media nowadays, it's hard to get a balanced and fair approach. Yeah. And I think he really does. And he speaks about Burnham. He mentions the things that Burnham is really good at. And Burnham is fantastic. Again, with Blair, Burnham is fantastic. If you've ever been in a room with Burnham, his ability to empathise with people and to connect with people is amazing. But he talks about some of his issues and downfalls as a politician. So highly recommend that.
Yeah, good. Okay. So from being on the rails with HS2 to being off the rails with our political projects.
Oh, I found myself getting really into that.
Good. So thanks for listening. It sounds like you're giving people loads of homework in the show notes this week. So
that's true.
Please do your homework.
Yeah.
And we will see you again next week.
Thanks for listening.